How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balanced stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.
The proceeding will start shortly.
Order! Order. Order! Order. I remind colleagues that the ballot for Select Committee Chair elections is taking place today until 4 p.m. in Committee Room 16. We now come to questions Secretary of State for International Development, Edward Timpson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number one.
Mr. Speaker, firstly could I say that it's a delight to see the Conservative bench is so well attended for different orals. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer question 1 together with question 3. My department is providing expertise to help developing countries reduce plastic usage and funding innovative plastic projects, pilot projects, for example in Uganda and Ghana, to improve recycling rates and waste collection.
Edward Timpson.
To the Secretary of State. With 2020 set to become the first 2020 set to become the first ever year that the pieces of plastic in our seas outnumber fish. Can the Secretary of State update the House on the government's plans for the UK to play its part in tackling this shocking statistic, including through its new Blue Planet Fund?
Well, Mr. Speaker, could I first welcome my right honourable friend back to the House. We're all delighted that he's back with us. In terms of the Blue Planet Fund, as he knows, the Government has committed £500 million towards the fund to support developing countries in managing the marine environment. The fund, which is in the process of being designed, will run for 5 years from April next year and will focus on 4 priority areas in marine management: fisheries, pollution, including plastic pollution, climate change and marine protected areas.
Mark Jenkinson.
I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to tackling plastic usage. In my constituency of Workington, people care about the future of our seas and oceans. Young students of Ashfield Infant and Nursery School, Home St Cuthbert School and St Michael's Nursery and Infant School have written a book about Drigsby, the young fin whale who sadly died on a Cumbrian beach, a victim of plastic poisoning. What is the Department for International Development doing to rid the world's oceans of plastic waste?
Well, Mr. Speaker, around 70% of all litter in the ocean is made up of plastic, and therefore I very much commend the work of my honourable friend and his young constituents in highlighting the clear and present danger of plastic pollution to life in our oceans. The Government recognises the need for action through our joint leadership with Vanuatu of the Commonwealth Clean Ocean Alliance, and we're supporting technical assistance for countries which are committed to taking practical steps to tackle marine pollution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the poorest countries, 93% of waste is burned or discarded in roads, open land or waterways. So can the Secretary of State expand on his answer to the first question in relation to what he's doing to develop a system of improved waste collection, but also encouraging recycling across many of these countries?
The honourable gentleman raises a very important point. Let me give him a couple of examples. So in Uganda and Ghana, my department is providing support for pilot projects where we're working with businesses to improve waste management and increase recycling. In Uganda, for example, we're working with the Kampala Plastics Recycling Partnership.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Dutch NGO Ocean Cleanup discovered that the majority of plastics in the seas comes from abandoned fishing gear and nets. Does he agree that providing assistance to fishermen in developing countries is one way to eliminate this waste?
Yes, the honourable gentleman is right. I've talked about the Commonwealth Alliance, but he will also know at the 2019 UN General Assembly, the Prime Minister announced the Global Ocean Alliance of countries which aim to protect at least 30% of the global ocean within marine protected areas by 2030.
More.
Number 2.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will group these questions with 4, 5 and 8. DFID is at the forefront of global efforts to tackle illegal logging, promote sustainable trade in timber and eliminate deforestation from supply chains. These programmes and other assistance from the UK are helping to preserve the world's most valuable habitats and address biodiversity loss.
Robbie Moore.
I thank the Minister for his response. It was great to see many families, particularly children from Addingham in my constituency, plant over 600 trees last weekend, setting an example to us all. How does the Government plan to inspire the next generation of leaders, like the children from my constituency in Keighley, to go on and ensure that we can continue to use our influence on the global platform to help reduce carbon emissions, improve biodiversity and plant more trees?
Well, can I start by joining my honourable friend in paying tribute to his constituents from Addingham and him in representing them in this House so well. The Government will ensure a strong voice for young people at COP26 in November so that their views on climate and nature are heard on the global stage. DFID is committing to involving young people in our work, promoting active and engaged citizenship through our policy and programmes.
James Wilde.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people in North West Norfolk supported our manifesto commitments to tackle climate change and to help countries receiving development aid to become more self-sufficient. So what steps is my honourable friend taking to ensure the aid budget through CDC is investing in projects in Africa and elsewhere in forestry to both protect the environment and to help reduce poverty?
Very good.
Well, I'm delighted to tell my honourable friend that the Secretary of State and I were visiting CDC on Monday. CDC has a number of investments in sustainable forestry across Africa and is actively exploring opportunities to do more. For example, CDC is supporting Myro Forestry, a sustainable timber business operating in Sierra Leone and Ghana. CDC's investment is helping Myro support the natural environment by replanting severely degraded land and thereby protecting the indigenous forest. To date, the investment has supported the planting of roughly 5.4 million trees.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is shameful that the Amazon rainforest is being destroyed to provide pasture for cattle grazing. This is not only devastating for an important global natural resource, but it is undercutting British beef production. Would the Minister agree with me that efforts to prevent deforestation are essential for global biodiversity, as well as supporting British beef farmers, such as those in my constituency of Brecon and Radnorshire?
DFID is supporting programmes on reforestation and promoting sustainable beef production. The UK's Partnership for Forest programmes works in South America to support sustainable businesses which grow crops and rear cattle without causing deforestation. This includes support for a responsible beef partnership which works to eliminate purchases of beef from producers engaged in illegal deforestation.
Whittaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst I accept as a dual national that Australia is not a developing country, however, the ongoing bushfires has seen forestry and bushland destroyed to the tune of almost 25 million acres, or an area almost 5 times the size of Wales. We've also seen the destruction of well over 1 billion species as well. Can my honourable friend inform the House on what support has been offered to Australia to help rebuild not just bushland and forests, but also the biodiversity that has been destroyed also?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. Our heart goes out to everybody in Australia who's been affected by these devastating fires. The fires are a tragedy which has reminded us all of the catastrophe which climate change is inflicting on forests and biodiversity. The UK stands ready to provide our Australian friends with the support they need, including our full range of humanitarian capabilities if required.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just over a week ago, the Prime Minister made a showpiece promise to end all UK aid spending on coal, which is all well and good, but there hasn't been any since 2012. This is more evidence that the government is more interested in talking big on climate change globally, rather than taking actual action. It's time for the government to get serious. Will the Minister commit today to stop spending taxpayer money on gas, oil and fracking, which is helping to destroy our planet and biodiversity, and instead use this aid to tackle the vast amounts of poverty and inequality across the globe?
Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the honourable gentleman to read the announcement from the Prime Minister's speech more carefully. The Prime Minister's announcement includes not just our bilateral aid assistance, but also investment, export credit and trade promotion support. The Government has shown significant leadership in tackling climate change, not least through our announcements to double international climate finance commitment to developing countries, and we will be hosting COP26 later this year.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, is the Minister aware that an all-party group have invited leaders of the indigenous communities of the Amazon to visit this House of Commons on the 5th of February? Could I ask all members to meet these people and listen to their concerns and what faces them in terms of the deforestation of the Amazon?
I think the honourable gentleman is right. We need to, around the world, work with indigenous communities and work with people. Many people in the developing world owe their livelihoods and their incomes to local forests, and therefore we need to work with communities in everything we do.
Mr. Speaker, developing countries around the world face the loss of trees and animals at a catastrophic rate as the climate emergency worsens. When will the Secretary of State follow the bold leadership of the Scottish Government and the recommendations of the International Development Committee and explicitly adopt the concept of climate justice to help climate spending and ensure the most vulnerable receive the help they need to protect their biodiversity?
Very good. Well, Mr. Speaker, the UK are global leaders. Not only are we the fastest to remove our own carbon emissions out of the G7, but we are also making groundbreaking commitments, such as the Prime Minister's commitment at the UN General Assembly to double our international climate finance spending. I think we have a proud record to tell, but we are going to work even harder to ensure that COP26 in Glasgow in November is a huge success.
In Colombia, international agro-business is regularly stealing land from campesino and indigenous peoples so as to cut down the trees and to simply plant acre after acre after acre of palm oil. This is unsustainable for the future and bad for the environment. What is the government doing to talk to the Colombian government to bring the peace process back on track so that indigenous people can have their land back?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. DFID supports the Tropical Forest Alliance 2020, a public-private initiative with 90 member organisations which is focused on realising private sector commitments to eliminate deforestation in the supply chains for palm oil, for beef, for soya and for paper. This is one of the many initiatives that we are taking to address the consequences of palm oil production.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, our departments work together to ensure development is at the heart of UK trade policy. This includes delivering the successful UK-Africa Investment Summit, where we announced the Trade Connect service. This service will help developing countries make the most of preferential access to UK markets and also support UK firms to strengthen their supply chains in developing countries.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. Increasing the number of women in the workforce is key for economic growth. What support is DFID giving to women entrepreneurs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I firstly commend my honourable friend for his support for entrepreneurship in his constituency more widely. In terms of the UK, we are absolutely committed to increasing women's role in trade, recognising the importance of trade as a lever for equality, and that is why we've recently announced an extension to the She Trades Commonwealth programme, which provides training and mentoring to female entrepreneurs and connects them to international markets and investment opportunities.
Chris Law. Mr. Speaker, in 2013 Australia merged both its aid and trade departments, resulting in worst performing aid programmes, a mass exodus of development experts, and even led to DFID to downgrade the Australian Department of Trade to third-tier status for staff exchanges. Is this the future the Secretary of State wants for his own department, or does he agree with me that a standalone department remains the best way for the UK to deliver world-leading international development projects?
Well, Mr. Speaker, machinery of government changes are a matter for the Prime Minister, but the UK is indeed and will continue to be a superpower when it comes to international development, and he will have seen the commitment to 0.7 in our manifesto.
Dale Clark.
Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on the success of the Africa Investment Summit and ask what further steps the government is taking to support British businesses like JCB in my constituency of Stafford to export more and help generate local jobs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, of course, in her previous career has done an enormous amount to ensure there is more bilateral trade and investment. The Africa Investment Summit was indeed a success, and it builds partnerships with governments, with companies for the future, and this will lead to even more trade and jobs in both countries.
Annalise Stocks.
Question 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? She's right to raise this, and I'm very pleased to say the UK leads the world in our support to the Africa-led movement to end FGM. In November 2018, we announced a further £50 million in UK aid to tackle FGM over the next 5 years, including £15 million for our programme in Sudan, now in its second phase.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Minister for what he said, and of course he'll be aware that the International Zero Tolerance of FGM Day is occurring next week. Now, in that context, given some of the discussions around potential reorganisation of DFID, he'll understand why some in the sector are concerned about whether that funding will be retained up to 2025. Can you please give us that guarantee, because the relationships underpinning those programmes take time to embed?
Well, I would remind the Honourable Lady that, notwithstanding what may happen with machinery of government, as my right honourable friend the Secretary of State has just said, we are committed, indeed legally obliged, to spend 0.7% of GNI. And that's a firm commitment. She should be in no doubt about that. On the issue of FGM, we, of course, like her, are looking forward to the International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGM on the 6th of February, and we wish it well. The theme, of course, unleashing youth power, is one we would entirely agree with. Can I say to her that following DFID's success in helping to achieve legal change in partner countries, we look forward to making another further important announcement on how we will work with international partners to strengthen laws, policies and systems to respond to FGM.
Alford. Number 9, sir.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his question? He will know that the UK is committed to making progress towards a negotiated two-state solution. Meanwhile, UK aid to Palestinians helps to meet immediate needs, deliver key services and promote economic development. It supports stability and the development of a capable and accountable Palestinian Authority that can act as an effective partner for peace with Israel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK taxpayers' aid pays the salaries of teachers in the Palestinian Authority schools. Yes, at least 31 official PA schools are named after terrorists who have killed innocent citizens. Does the Secretary of State share my concern that the children studying in those schools are being taught that it's honourable to commit violent acts against Israelis? And does he agree that instead of prolonging the conflict by supporting such rhetoric, we must do more to pressure the Palestinians to stop glorifying terrorists and use our aid for what it's meant for?
Well, what I say to my right honourable friend, he's right to raise this, is that we are quite clear with the Palestinian Authority on how we expect UK aid to be spent. Last week, I had a further meeting with the Palestinian Authority Education Minister, Professor Awatani, following our meeting in Ramallah last year. He expressed his commitment to the EU review of teaching materials and the PA's own review that will be available prior to the start of the academic year this year. What I would say to him, however, is that education means hope, and we need to be careful about removing hope in the OPTs because it is what is preventing people falling into the arms of those who have a mischievous intent for the future of that part of the world.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the report the Honourable Lady refers to in her question and its recognition that my department is a force for good, saves children's lives and makes a real difference. The report is very much in line with the government's ambition to end preventable maternal, newborn and child deaths by 2030.
Without global leadership, we are not going to meet the Sustainable Development Target 3.2 and end preventable child death by 2030. Does the Minister agree that we should place child health on a level footing with the government's commitment to girls' education?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she cares very deeply about this issue, and I completely understand that. And she will also know that we made a commitment in our manifesto on tackling preventable deaths and making sure that we prevent this by 2030. And I hope in the coming weeks to set out a detailed strategy on how we will do this.
Mr. Speaker, the UK government has an outstanding record in contributing to the 50% fall in the number of children in developing countries who die before their 5th birthday. But even with that progress, UNICEF calculates that 52 million children will still die before the age of 5 by 2030. So what more can we do to provide additional leadership to make sure we get rid of diseases like pneumonia and lack of access to basic vaccines that will help this blight on our...
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we support organisations like the Global Fund, and he will know that we are hosting the replenishment of Gavi later on this year in the UK, and he's very right to highlight this important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 11, Mr.
The UK is at the forefront of the fight against hunger, giving £461 million to humanitarian food assistance in 2018 through the World Food Programme. We will take a leadership position as a global influencer and convener alongside Germany at the SGD2 Summit in Berlin in June and other events leading up to the New York Food Systems Summit and Japan's Nutrition for Growth Summit.
Thank you. Malnutrition is the #1 risk factor for TB, the world's deadliest infectious disease. A quarter of the 10 million new cases last year were caused by undernutrition, and treatment is less effective for those unable to access a good diet. What steps is the government taking to ensure that fewer people fall ill with TB and to improve access to the nutritional support for those that do?
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right to link TB and malnutrition. I hope he will have approved of the UK contribution to the Global Fund against AIDS, malaria and TB last year. I think that was a huge effort on behalf of this country. He will also, I think, approve of the Gavi replenishment that this country will be hosting in London in June.
Topicals, question 1, Andrew Jones.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in August I announced an International Development Infrastructure Commission to advise me on mobilising additional private sector funds alongside public money to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations estimates that an additional $2.5 trillion is required annually to meet those goals, and the Commission has now made recommendations on how to turbocharge infrastructure investment in developing countries. At the recent UK-Africa Investment Summit, I announced that the UK will work together, initially with the governments of Uganda, Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia and Ghana, to do just that.
Andrew Jones. Thank my right honourable friend for that answer. I was pleased to see that COP26 will be held in Glasgow. Can the Secretary of State update the House on preparations for that conference?
Good question.
Mr. Speaker, a successful delivery of COP26 in November is an absolute key priority for the government, and cross-departmental work is being coordinated through the Cabinet Office. It is absolutely vital for current and future generations that all of us around the world step up to the challenge.
Doug Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State clarify what is his department's policy on spending UK aid money on expanding fossil fuels overseas?
Mr. Speaker, I think the answer has been given by my honourable friend earlier when it came to the statement the Prime Minister made at the Africa Investment Summit.
I'm afraid that's just not good enough, Mr. Speaker. Last week's UK-Africa Investment Summit cost the department over £15 million of aid money on a one-day event. I wonder if he can say now whether any of that money was spent on business-class flights, five-star hotels, because the department won't disclose the figures until autumn 2021. At the summit, almost £2 billion worth of new energy deals were struck for fossil fuels. How on earth can the Secretary of State justify using taxpayers' funds to help fossil fuel companies when we're in the midst of a climate catastrophe?
Mr. Speaker, I'll just say to the honourable gentleman that if he read the communique that came out of the summit, he will have seen the billions of pounds of investment, but also UK support going to developing countries, and he always castigates private investment. I would just say to him, Mr. Speaker, that perhaps he ought to read what the UN Secretary General wrote in November in the Financial Times, where he pointed out that the private sector is vital to advance development goals. Sometimes he needs to read and listen to the experts rather than to people on his own benches.
Shirley McLaurie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend reassure companies insuring farmers, such as specialising in renewables, such as Kenza heat pumps, how the Africa Summit held last week will boost African countries' efforts to adopt cleaner forms of fuel?
Well, Mr. Speaker, a very good question. The summit highlighted the UK's distinct offer to support clean growth and our expertise in low-carbon sectors in green finance. And as example, with the President of Kenya, I attended the London Stock Exchange for the launch of the first green Simba bond, which the UK government helped to develop.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that educating and employing women and girls will remain a key strategy for his department?
Absolutely, it will.
Tom Tugundar.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Could the Secretary of State update the House on what measures he's taking to empower women's economy, the women's economy in many developing countries?
Well, Mr. Speaker, women and girls are very much at the heart of our approach to economic development, and no society, I think every colleague will agree with this, no society can truly flourish if half the population is held back. At the UK-Africa Investment Summit, I announced further support for our Work and Opportunities for Women programme, which will help at least 100,000 additional women to achieve better paid and more secure work.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has a responsibility for the plastic pollution we see, particularly in developing countries. The UK has a major responsibility for the plastic pollution that we see, particularly in developing countries. So what work is the UK government doing to stop the trade and export of plastic pollution from the UK?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I did set out earlier what we are doing in terms of this particular area, but what I would say to him is that, of course, there is a legitimate export market for plastic waste as a secondary raw material. However, we take very firm action against those engaged in the illegal export of contaminated, low-quality and unrecyclable plastic waste.
Gentleman Pleshley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the recent significant influx of Syrian refugees into the Kurdistan region of Iraq, I understand that there are issues with the allocation of British funding to the Kurdistan region. So can my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the region, who have accommodated over 1 million refugees and displaced people since 2014 and sort out the funding?
I most certainly do join him in paying tribute to the Kurdistan regional government and other governments in the area that are helping in this respect, including Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey. I'm not aware of any delays to the allocation to which he refers, but I'm very happy to look into the matter.
We now come to PMQs. Question 1, Colonel Monaghan.
Happily, Mr. Speaker. Question number.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I will have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Monday was Holocaust Memorial Day, when we remember those who suffered under Nazi persecution. During this dark time, Britain stood out as a beacon of hope, and 10,000 Jewish children came here with the Kinder transport. When his government rejected Lord Dubb's amendment on unaccompanied child refugees, Britain's beacon dimmed. Will the Prime Minister now devolve powers over immigration to Holyrood to allow Scotland to be that beacon of hope?
Mr. Speaker, I think she does a disservice to this country's reputation and to its record, because we have not only taken 41,000 children, unaccompanied children, since 2010, but I think this whole country can be very proud of everything that we continue to do to commemorate the Holocaust and what took place then.
Bill Wigan.
I know that my right honourable friend would never put our country at risk. I also know that he was born in America. So what plans does he have to convince the US Secretary of State that the Huawei deal is safe not only for our constituents but also for our allies?
I thank my right honourable friend, and he raises a most important point, which I know is of great concern to members across the House. And I want to assure the House, and indeed the country, that I think it is absolutely vital that people in this country do have access to the best technology available, but that we also do absolutely nothing to imperil our relationship with the United States, to do anything to compromise our critical national security infrastructure, or to do anything to imperil our extremely valuable cooperation with Five Eyes security partners.
Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to send our thoughts to the family and friends of the Royal Marine soldier who sadly died in a training incident earlier this week. And if you forgive me, Mr. Speaker, could we take just a minute to pay tribute to Nicholas Parsons, who passed away this week, and thank him for his work in broadcasting. This Friday, the UK will be leaving the European Union. The actions we take over the months and years ahead will shape our future role within the international community for generations to come. Britain's role in the world will face one of its most important tests later this year when COP26 meets in Glasgow to discuss the need for drastic action to tackle the climate emergency. Given the scale of the crisis, does the Prime Minister think that we as a country should be financing billions of pounds on oil and gas projects all around the world?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me first of all say in deference to and in memory of Nicholas Parsons, I think we should all avoid hesitation, deviation or repetition in this House. And I can answer very clearly by saying I do think it important that the UK continues to campaign against hydrocarbon emissions of all kinds, as we do. And he will have noticed that we have just decided to ban support for all extraction of coal around the world. And that is a massive step forward by this country.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Speaker, the report from the BBC and Unearthed investigation has revealed that a government agency has helped to finance oil and gas projects which will emit 69 million tonnes of carbon a year, nearly a sixth of the total emissions from this country alone. The effects of climate change have been felt in this country with flooding in Yorkshire and the Midlands and, of course, with the wildfires in Australia. Despite pledging to reach net zero emissions by 2050, on current track the government will only meet the target by 2099. Can we afford to wait another 79 years before we reach net zero in this country?
Mr. Speaker, this government has doubled spending on tackling climate change internationally to £11.6 billion, and I'm not surprised actually, because he's so pessimistic, he's so gloomy. Don't forget, Mr. Speaker, that this country has reduced CO2 emissions already by 42% on 1990 levels, whilst the economy under this Conservative government has grown by 73%. That's our record. We can do both.
Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn has voted against every proposal to take action on climate change until he became Prime Minister. I hope for the sake of our future he changes his mind before COP26 meets in Glasgow. And speaking of failing to take a global lead on climate change, the US Secretary of State is visiting later today. President Trump's latest Middle East peace plan is not a peace plan. It will annex Palestinian territory, lock in illegal Israeli colonisation, transfer Palestinian citizens of Israel and deny Palestinian people their fundamental rights. When the government meets with the US Secretary of State later today, will he make it clear that the British government will stand for a genuine, internationally backed peace plan rather than this stuff proposed by Trump yesterday?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. This is a problem that has bedevilled the world for decades, and the Middle East, of course, in particular. No peace plan is perfect, but this has the merit of a two-state solution. It is a two-state solution. It would ensure that Jerusalem is both the capital of Israel and of the Palestinian people. And I urge him, rather than being so characteristically negative, to reach out to his friend, my friends, our friends in the Palestinian Authority, to Mahmoud Abbas, for whom I have the highest respect, and urge him for once to engage with this initiative, to get talking rather than to leave a political vacuum.
Jeremy Corbyn. I have the greatest respect for President Abbas and those in the Palestinian Authority. I've met them many times. And as the Prime... Mr. Speaker, this is actually a very serious issue, and I think the Prime Minister should acknowledge that President Trump's plan will not bring any move towards peace, has no support from any Palestinian anywhere in the world, and maybe this would be a good opportunity for the British government to say frankly and candidly to the US, on this you are wrong. There needs to be a two-state solution with international support. The kind of test for this country for the future has to be how we work to end conflict abroad. The Saudi Arabian-led intervention in Yemen has led to the needless deaths of innocent men, women and children. Yet this government has broken the ban on Saudi arms sales 3 times, while Donald Trump has vetoed a ban on arms exports 3 times. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he will respect his own ban and will, when he meets the US later today, ask them to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia while they continue the bombardment of the people of Yemen?
Prime Minister. Well, as he knows, the Saudi-led operation in Yemen is supported by the UN, a UN mandate to restore the government of Yemen, and it is absolutely vital. He's completely correct that the crisis in Yemen continues, and it's a tragedy for the people of Yemen. But I think what he should rather be doing is supporting the activity of the British UN negotiator, Martin Griffiths, who is doing a fantastic job in trying to bring the sides together and to get a peaceful solution led by Yemenis.
Jeremy Corbyn. Of course they're trying to bring about a peace process, but it's not helped when one country supplies arms to Saudi Arabia, which has led to the deaths of 100,000 people in Yemen last year alone. According to Human Rights Watch, Saudi authorities have stepped up their arbitrary arrests, trials and convictions and killing of peaceful dissidents and activists, including a large-scale crackdown against the women's rights movement. When the Prime Minister heads to Riyadh later this year for the G20, will he make it clear that any future trade arrangement with Saudi Arabia will be dependent on an improvement of their human rights laws and their human rights record, particularly in respect of women in that country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it won't have escaped the House's attention. The Right Honourable Gentleman is a supporter and defender of the Iranian regime in Tehran, who have grossly exacerbated the tensions in Yemen by sending missiles to attack the civilian population of Saudi Arabia. And of course we raise human rights in Saudi Arabia. My Right Honourable friend, Foreign Secretary, raised the rights of women in Saudi Arabia only the other day. We will continue to do that, and we will do that ever more vigorously, ever more energetically, as we pursue our policy of a global Britain doing free trade deals around the world, which will give us the leverage to make exactly these points.
Jeremy Corbyn. Mr. Speaker, I condemn human rights abuses in every country in the world, including Iran, Russia and anywhere else where they are committed. My question was, what is being done to ensure our future trade deals are dependent on good human rights in the countries that we deal with? 9 women are in Saudi prisons at the present time, merely for standing up for equal rights for women. 4 of them have received electric shock treatment during interrogation. Is that the kind of human rights we tolerate? I sincerely hope not. Britain, Mr. Speaker, is at a crossroads. We're leaving the EU and Britain's place in the world is going to change. The question is what direction it takes. The signs are that this government is prepared to sacrifice our country's interests and values for short-term political advantage and a sell-out trade deal with Donald Trump. As Foreign Secretary, he embarrassed this country, and as Prime Minister, he shows every sign of being prepared to sell it off. When will the Prime Minister accept the only chance of a truly internationalist Britain is to work with our global partners to tackle the climate catastrophe, expand trade, fight human rights abuses and promote peace? Thank God he's going.
Mr. Speaker, the difference between this government and the way it treats international affairs and the Labour Party under the present leadership can be summarised as follows. This, in the Right Honourable Gentleman, is a leader of the Labour Party who has consistently stood up not just for Tehran, but for Vladimir Putin when he poisoned innocent people on the streets of this country. He has said he would scrap the armed services of the United Kingdom. He'd end our nuclear deterrent, and he'd abolish NATO, which has been the bulk of our security for the last 70 years. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that is leading the world in tackling abuses, in sticking up for human rights, in championing the struggle against climate change, and in leading the fight that every single girl in the world should have access to 12 years of quality education. That is what global Britain under this government is delivering. He would isolate this country. He would deprive us of our most crucial allies. We are going to take this country forward, outwards, into the world. And, Mr. Speaker, in case I forgot to mention it before, we are going to deliver on our promises and take us out of the European Union, despite everything that he and all the parties opposite tried to do this Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government has an incredible opportunity with our Prime Minister's vision to deliver change by driving forward the levelling up of parts of the country which have lagged behind London. Will the Prime Minister confirm that beautiful Hastings and Rye will not be overlooked in the process of levelling up, and that the necessary investment will be made in our transport infrastructure, education and health to unleash our bags of talent and potential?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that the infrastructure revolution will, of course, penetrate all the way to Hastings and Rye and across the whole country, and in it there will be an additional £100 million for the redevelopment of the Conquest Hospital and Eastbourne District Hospital, which I know will be a benefit to her constituents.
Blackfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland, of course, has been dragged out of the European Union against our will. We hope our European friends will leave a light on for Scotland. Mr. Speaker, during the EU referendum, the Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, said that when it comes to immigration, it would be for the people of Scotland to decide. Right. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Scottish Government published its plans for a Scottish visa, doing just what the Right Honourable Member promised Scotland should be able to do. Before the ink was even dry, these proposals were rejected without consideration. Since the Prime Minister would never reject a proposal before reading it, can he tell the House on what points he disagrees with Model 3? And if it helps, Mr. Speaker, it was outlined on page 20 of the proposal.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm every sympathy with the industries and businesses of Scotland that need to allow workers to come freely to it for the seasonal agricultural worker scheme we have doubled. And that's very, very important. And I thank the lobbying representations I've had from Conservative colleagues in Scotland on that point. But I think the idea of having a Scottish-only visa, Mr. Speaker, with a border at Berwick and a wall inspection posts, I think this is absolutely fanciful and deranged. And whatever there may be on page 20 of his document, I doubt if he explains who's going to pay for it, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, nobody's suggesting such a thing, and that just confirms the Prime Minister doesn't have a clue. Unlike the Prime Minister, experts backed the Scottish Government's proposals. The Scottish Trade Union Congress support them. The Federation of Small Business support them. The Scottish Council for Development and Industry support them. Even the MAC report, commissioned by his own government, has highlighted additional migration routes as a means of increasing population growth. The Scottish Government's proposals will boost Scotland's population, grow our economy and protect public services. The UK Government's policies threaten to plunge our working-age population into decline. Mr. Speaker, we were told we would have the most powerful devolved parliament in the world. We were told we would be an equal partner in the family of nations. Will the Prime Minister now read the Scottish Government proposal, listen to the evidence and deliver a tailored migration policy for Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, we will have exactly such a thing. We will have a points-based system that will deliver the immigration that this whole country needs. May I say to him, Mr. Speaker, the way to boost the population of Scotland is not to have a Scottish government that taxes the population of Scotland to oblivion, that fails to deliver results in their schools. Mr. Speaker, it may interest you to know that the SNP have not had a debate in their parliament on education for 2 years. What are they debating today? Whether or not to fly the EU flag. They should get on with the day job, Mr. Speaker.
Andrew Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, up in Yorkshire, in your Conservative Brexit heartlands, we are celebrating us leaving the EU on Friday with a big Brexit bash. I wish to congratulate the Prime Minister on achieving us leaving the EU when so many deemed it impossible. Now, does he agree with me that this is an opportunity for a new chapter in our great country when we will finally control our laws, our borders and our money and become a truly global trading nation?
Mr. Speaker, I do join her in her celebrations. I'm sorry I can't be there personally, but I wish everybody in Morley and out with a very enjoyable big Brexit bash.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sexual exploitation doesn't end when you turn 18. Indeed, it is the main driver of modern slavery and trafficking of women in this country. So will the Prime Minister join other countries around the world by bringing in legislation to end demand, making it illegal to buy sexual consent?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly happy to look at the proposals that she wishes to bring them forward to the House.
Kevin Holleray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree we need to increase capacity in our railways in and between the North, the Midlands, the South and Scotland? And unless we want decades of disruption, the only way to do this is through the Midlands Engine Rail, Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend that we are not only building the Northern Powerhouse Rail and investing in the Midlands Rail Hub, but as he knows, we are looking into whether and how to proceed with HS2, and the House can expect an announcement very shortly.
Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this Prime Minister has shown no respect for Scotland. In fact, so will he listen to the Scottish food and drink sector, who currently employ 40,000 EU nationals? Now we have 46,000 roles needing filled by 2030. Mr. Speaker, the figures are clear. Immigration is an urgent priority for Scotland. So when will this Prime Minister accept that Scotland must have the power to tailor its own immigration policy and ensure that we have the powers to do so?
Mr. Speaker, I have the utmost and highest respect for Scotland, for people of Scotland. I have less respect, I must say, for the SNP government of Scotland, which is currently, because of its failures, is producing less growth than any other part of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by congratulating the Prime Minister on ensuring that this is the final Prime Minister's questions of our time as a member of the European Union? But I know that he shares my concern about the loss of biodiversity around the world. I have seen at first hand how it is possible to turn a palm oil plantation back into a fast-recovering rainforest full of wildlife. Can I ask him to ensure that whilst we're doing good work in restoring environment around the world already, that we step up through DFID, the work we do to restore biodiversity, and in doing so, help tackle climate change?
My right honourable friend raises an exceptionally important point, and that is why it's vital that we have a direct link between the Chinese COP summit on biodiversity and our COP26 summit on climate change.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talks of avoiding hesitation, repetition and deviation, but would he agree as well that we should avoid hypocrisy? Because we won't be taken seriously. We won't be taken seriously on climate leadership as long as we are ploughing taxpayers' money into projects overseas that are emitting huge amounts of carbon. It's not just the export finance, it's also the fact that at the Africa Summit last week, $2 billion was going to be ploughed into more oil and gas. So would he join me and the Environmental Audit Committee in agreeing that from the end of 2021 there should be no UK money going into fossil fuels overseas? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell her is that we've doubled spending on tackling climate change, 11.6 billion, and no, not another penny will be going into digging out coal, and we will do everything we can to help the rest of the world to achieve the incredible record of the UK government in reducing CO2 emissions. That is our ambition.
Come on, Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Sunday is World Wetlands Day, and I have the superb Slimbridge WWT headquarters in my constituency. Will the Prime Minister tell us what the Environment Bill will do for wetlands and wildlife, and will he come and visit our famous flamboyance of flamingos?
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to seeing her famous flamboyant flamingos at the earliest opportunity, but I can tell her that our environment plan does place biodiversity frameworks on a statutory footing. Whether or not that includes flamingos, Mr. Speaker, I don't know. But we are putting...
Filipino ferries in Hull are finding Filipino seafarers to work for far below the national minimum wage. They are expected to work 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week for 6 months at a time. And the Prime Minister will remember that the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster, which claimed the lives of 193 passengers and crew, was caused by seafarer fatigue. Will he agree to meet a cross-party group of MPs to discuss this issue and try to put this issue to bed once and for all, and indeed to protect British seafarer jobs?
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, he's absolutely right to raise this, and I think it is a serious issue. I've been told that the replacement crew's working pattern meets the requirements of international maritime conventions, but plainly there are concerns that we have for all the reasons that he mentions. Perhaps the shortest answer I can give is that I know that my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will be only too happy to meet him and others concerned.
Andy Carter.
This week in my constituency of Warrington South, the much-anticipated Chapelford Medical Centre opened, improving GP access for residents. Will the Prime Minister confirm that this government's intention is to recruit, train and deploy more doctors so we can increase the number of appointments for people in Warrington and across the UK?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that we will not only deliver more doctors, 6,000 more GPs, though, as I think you may recall, we are also pledged to deliver 40 new hospitals and 50,000 more nurses. This is the party of delivery and decision and democracy, and we get on with the job.
Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that we've been pressing for some time for a pension for innocent victims of violence in Northern Ireland. Can he update the House on the progress made thus far and give an absolute assurance that those in receipt of such a pension are innocent victims and it will not include those perpetrators who were injured by their own actions?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, obviously we have every sympathy for innocent victims of violence in Northern Ireland, and we've been consistently clear that the principle that those who have sustained injuries must have happened through no fault of their own. That principle will be sustained throughout the negotiations.
Much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that the Future Fit programme is a £312 million investment in upgrading and modernising hospital services in Shropshire. Telford Council, a medically illiterate organisation, has managed to prevent these changes over the last 6 years, undermining the 300 local doctors and surgeons who believe it's essential for patient safety. Will the Prime Minister intervene to use his good offices to help us break this deadlock? Otherwise, patient safety will be put at risk at the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital.
I thank my honourable friend for raising that issue, and I can tell him that we are indeed getting on with that job, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, says that he will personally intervene to ensure that that is done.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Where the MAC report proposes a reduction in salary thresholds from £30,000 to £25,600, it does not go far enough. Given that around half of the Scottish employees earn less than the proposed threshold, that rises to almost 90% in the vital care sector. Does the Prime Minister agree that protecting Scotland's care sector with a tailored migration system is more important than his ideological obsession of cutting immigration?
Mr. Speaker, I think the House should be clear that we do not wish in any way to deprive any part of the UK of the labour that it needs. But we will, and we have special provisions to ensure that Scotland is properly catered for. And as I say, we've doubled the seasonal agricultural workers scheme. But we will respond in due course to the stipulations of the Migration Advisory Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know my right honourable friend is very fond of the north east of Scotland, having visited twice in the last year. So will he commit here today to delivering the long-awaited oil and gas sector deal, so we can work with that industry as it transitions to net zero and make Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire not just the oil and gas capital of Europe, but the energy capital of the world?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and not only that, Mr. Speaker, but we can do it in such a way as to continue this country's reduction in hydrocarbon emissions.
Mr. Speaker, the shortage of GPs has reached crisis point, and in his answer to the honourable gentleman, the Prime Minister did nothing to allay the fears and concerns of patients who are waiting weeks to see a GP now. People in training is all very well, but what's he going to do now to make sure patients can access GPs?
Well, she's right to raise the point, but, Mr. Speaker, the number of GPs is already going up, and as I've just told the House, we are recruiting 6,000 more.
Yesterday's announcement of the Nexus contract being placed with the Swiss company Stadler instead of Hitachi Rail, who are based in my Sedgefield constituency, is, in my opinion, inappropriate and takes no account of the socio-economic benefit to us of UK-based business. I hope to see a positive decision on HS2 with its potential to reconnect the North with London, and would ask the Prime Minister to ensure that UK-based businesses like Hitachi see that investment in the UK properly recognised in the procurement process.
Yes. Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend has personally raised the issue with me before, and I'm sure that his constituents will congratulate him on sticking up for their interests in the way that he does, and I can tell them that there will be a decision on HS2 very shortly if he can just contain his impatience a little bit longer.
Johnson. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the EU published the Erasmus Plus programme annual report. It showed Edinburgh University as the top UK institution for sending students on the scheme. Incoming higher education EU staff stood at 4,970 across the UK. Educational benefits are clearly endless. Will the Prime Minister now prioritise talks on the UK's continued participation so we don't face any delay in joining the next cycle from 2021?
Mr. Speaker, nothing in withdrawal from the EU stops UK students from being able to pursue their hopes, their dreams around the whole of the European Union, and we will ensure that that is the case.
Mr. Speaker, this week sees the start of the second phase of the Grenfell inquiry. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that our thoughts are with those affected, and what we seek from the inquiry is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as to what happened?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think most people would agree that Sir Martin Morbitt was pretty unflinching in the first section of his report, and I have no doubt that he will be equally unsparing in the next.
Mike Ainsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, is the BBC a mortal enemy of the Conservative Party or a cherished British institution that will be funded by the licence fee?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can certainly say that it's a cherished British institution and not a mortal enemy of the Conservative Party.
Elliot Coburn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Epsom and St Helier NHS Trust is receiving £500 million thanks to this Conservative government. Will he agree with me that this is excellent news for Carshalton and Wallington patients, and encourage constituents to get involved with the consultation on where the new hospital should go?
And I congratulate my honourable friend for speaking up for Carshalton and Wallington, and also drawing attention to investment in the NHS, which is increasing under this government, and for which we have now legislated, not just this year, not just next year, but for every year of this Parliament.
Mohammed Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I visited Grange Academy Special School in Kempston last week. The recent SIF bid to make desperately needed school improvements was turned down by the government. Will the Prime Minister urgently review the funding formula for both capital and revenue so St schools aren't disadvantaged simply because they have fewer pupils?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable makes an important point, but we are increasing funding for SEND schools by £780 million and ensuring that there are more SEND schools, but I'd be happy to look at the particular case that he raises.
Derek Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Half of the adult population in Cornwall and 40% of children have not seen an NHS dentist in the last year. Will my friend the Prime Minister, who is a friend of Penzance and Cornwall, meet with me to see how we can resolve this inequality?
I'm very happy to meet my honourable friend any time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that the international strand of Glasgow's fantastic Celtic Connections Festival has been scaled back by almost 20% this year because of what the director Donald Shaw describes as the hassle and stress of sourcing visas for overseas artists? What is the Prime Minister's message to artists that want to come here and share their talents but are put off by an overcomplicated, extortionate application process that signals they're not welcome?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, that this government has already instituted new measures to ensure that people of talent who are contributing to this economy can come without let or hindrance. And I'm surprised that the director of the festival that he refers to is encountering any difficulties. If he really has a problem, then may I direct him to my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Given the Prime Minister's proven track record in overcoming prevarication, procrastination, dither and delay, will he repeat that success and do as my other honourable friends have asked and get HS2 done? No. To secure jobs across the country and in Crewe and Nantwich?
Mr. Speaker, I just want to reassure all my honourable friends and everybody of whatever persuasion they may be about HS2 across this chamber that there will be an announcement and a decision very shortly.
Diolch yn fawr, Efarydd. I
I hope the Prime Minister has the humility to recognise that not everybody will be celebrating on Friday night. We've been promised that leaving the EU will bring power closer to the people, give us a greater say in our communities. Instead, there are many people who feel that they have so far been ignored and disempowered. Will he demonstrate his willingness to listen to all voices by meeting Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price and myself to discuss how Wales will win the tools to forge a better future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly share her general sentiment that it's time for the whole country to come together. I think that Wales voted to leave the EU from memory, and I think it's time that we regarded this as a beginning. This is curtain up on a fantastic future for our country, and that is the frame of mind, may I respectfully suggest to the Right Honourable Lady and others, in which they should approach it.
Order. I have a short statement to make. As Speaker of the House, this is a short statement by me. As Speaker of the House, I am committed to transparency, but I am mindful that the frank advice must be protected confidentially. To balance these principles, I have written to the Clerk of the House to establish a new procedure modelled on power of accounting officers to seek ministerial direction. The procedure will apply if I take a decision as Speaker which the Clerk of the House considers compromises a substantial breach of the standing orders or a departure from long-established conventions without appropriate authorisation by the House itself. In such a case, the Clerk of the House will be empowered to place a statement of his views in the library, and I will always make the House aware that this has been done. I am placing a copy of my letter in the Clerk of the House in the library, the letter from the Clerk of the House into the library.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balanced stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
The work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.